For this demo video, I'm going to be showing you how to create pulled handles, especially for wheel-thrown cup forms for your cup project. So typically you want to do this right after you trim. So if you notice, I have my two trimmed cups. I'm just going to keep using the same lump of plastic clay that I used to attach my cups to the wheel head. You can use this method for hand-built cups as well. It's not limited to wheel throwing, but for my students, this typically goes along with your cup project. So I start with making a thick coil, so just like you would have for your coil project. And I'm just going to start rolling it out. Sometimes I twist it just to kind of help keep the roundness, and I like to roll it just right on the table. So stretching that clay out. Alright, after a while I'm going to try to make a carrot. So I know I don't need that little area on the right, so I'm just going to cut that off. So carrot meaning it should be tapered on one end and thicker on the other. I have a bucket with a decent sponge, one that's a little bit more square. Just water in there. I'm going to hold with my non-dominant hand on the thick side of it, and I'm going to have my thumb on the back with my sponge over the top, my middle finger on the other side, and my index finger pushing down on the sponge. So that way I'm squeezing and pushing down. And I only do a couple swipes and then I'll flip it over so it doesn't get stuck to the table. There are different ways to do pulled handles. This is just a nice easy way for beginners. Keep in mind if you push too hard as you slide the sponge across, you will tear your clay. So be aware how thin it's getting and how quickly. Alright, so afterwards I just kind of go and clean up with my hands, make sure it's nice and even, it's not too goopy, there's no weird rough patches or weak spots. So I'm not really pulling, I'm just kind of compressing the clay back down onto itself. Just kind of cleaning it up. Alright, so just taking a needle tool, I'm just going to cut some of the excess off that I don't need. And I'm going to start just playing on the table with the size that I want. How many fingers do I want to be able to fit in the handle on my cup? Obviously I have to consider how big my cup is. So in this case I'm looking at my large cup here. So I could do it a little bit larger handle. However, for my smaller cup, I might want to just be able to fit 1 or 2 fingers in. So it just kind of depends. What's nice is with pulled clay like this, you can really experiment with the general form of the handle. It's very flexible and it dries fairly quick. Alright, so I'm going to cut this at an angle so that way it'll attach to my cup form nicely. Not going to cut it flat. Just thinking about the angle that'll be placed onto the cup. If you work with really sticky fingers, you're going to find that you just kind of make a mess. So I typically will wash off my fingers before I actually work on my cup. Alright, so just kind of getting the feel and placement. I'm liking that. So I'm also going to cut this top part at an angle. Now keep in mind you can always place that top part at different angles depending on your personal aesthetic. For this I just wanted to cut at an angle so it was placed on smoothly. Notice that it is at a slight angle overall as a handle. It doesn't go straight out at the dead center. That typically will create a crack if you do that. Alright, so I kind of found the placement that I want. If it helps you, if you want to make a mark, go for it. But I just start with attaching the top part of my handle first. So I'll still score. So I'll score my cup. I'll score the top of my handle. I have my slip. If your cup is feeling dry, even maybe score again. Then I'm going to lay that on. I do not do the bottom yet, so that way I can move it around if I need to, so I can really smooth down my handle. Smoothing down any edges, the underside. Make sure it doesn't get too thin though while you're doing this. And then I'll make sure I line up that, so then I'll make little marks for myself to make sure it's lined up. I'll score. If you want to offset it, you can. I would over exaggerate your offset so that way it looks purposeful and not an accident. Alright, then I'm going to place that in its spot, push down. That's okay to leave like the lines and shapes. You don't have to smooth it down totally, but make sure you smooth down a little bit and then you can always put lines back in. Alright, so smoothing that down. I'll go and adjust the handle a little bit in a second. There we go. For this next part, I'm just going to add little tiny coils to the inside areas that I'm going to point at here. So right here and right in here. I only do this if I feel like this could be a potential issue, especially at the top, or if like it felt like it got to be thin, because you don't want your handle to crack. So when I mean tiny coils, I mean like little tiny baby coils. So I'm just going to kind of place that over. Sorry that it got out of the screen here. I just kind of smooth that down, and then a tool that I especially like is a little bamboo stick, and I don't use the tip of it, I use the side of it, just because my fingers are too wide to try to fit in those little tiny spaces. You can also use my little rubber tools if you'd like to kind of make lines stand out again without creating a bunch of little burrs. I like to keep that as smooth as possible. Then putting another little tiny coil in that inside area at the bottom on my handle. And using my tool to kind of smooth that out. So as I'm making any cup form, I do think about its function. I think of how comfortable it is. Notice I did put my hand on there to feel how the handle is when I were to use it, but I don't like hold it by the handle, and don't hold it by the handle until it's actually been fired once through the bisque fire. Alright, so something that I like to do, especially for bigger cup forms, is make a little thumb rest, just to kind of help even out the balance while I'm holding that cup. It can be kind of a fun little added aesthetic. So it's just kind of a little teardrop shape that I kind of flatten, and I'm just going to attach that flattened part to the top of my handle. Thinking about how that would feel, liking that, and I just go and gently smooth it down. Alright, and I just add a little stamp at the bottom for a look. You can use stamps on the rest of it, you could use carving, however you like. Enjoy!